Thank you. So welcome again, everyone. Again, I'm Michael Taylor, the recruitment manager, and we'll be going over some information that pertains to the hiring interview, what that looks like, the different portions and pieces of that. And I really just want to first shout out Lauren Cohan, who is with TNTP, for developing the PowerPoint in this curriculum. I'm executing it, but she did a lot of the work to get things set up. So just wanted to thank her in advance. So to kick things off, we're going to go ahead and take a look at our partners. So we have a variety of partners that we work with. Sorry, the fire truck in the background. We have a variety of partners that we work with. Holyoke Public Schools and the Springfield Empowerment Zone are the large districts that we work with, along with 6 charter schools. So we have Veritas Prep, MLK Academy, Springfield Prep, Phoenix Charter Academy, and Libertas Academy. Those are the charters that we work with. All told, we have 30 schools that we work with, and we serve around 11,000 students throughout the area. One thing I do recommend, as you're getting conversations and interviews with schools, learn as much as you can about them. Go to their websites, go to things like Niche and Great Schools. I don't recommend using those sites for getting a good sense of exactly what's happening in the schools, but they will give you a sense of things like the demographics within the school, how many students they have, what grade levels and subject areas they have. It gives you a good sense of what you're getting yourself into and whether or not the school is a good fit for you. And we always recommend that folks go to our website, teachwesternmass.com, and we have our partner schools page there that goes over information about the different schools and districts that we work with. So I highly encourage you doing that after this call. All right? So to go ahead and kick things off, we've talked about our schools. Let's go ahead and get into the interviews. On the next few slides, we're going to dig into some sample questions, go over some different components that go along with the interview process, and then give you a chance to ask or answer any questions that go along with it. One of the big things I want to start with that's very important to keep in mind. We're talking about best practices that go along with the interview process. One very important thing to keep in mind is that schools are a very busy place. When they have things going on, they are either focusing on student needs, focusing on family needs, or focusing on the needs of the staff within the building. That said, they have very little free time, quote unquote, to handle all the other things that go on within the course of a school year. If they are taking the time to reach out and talk to you, you need to do your best to reach back out to them within 24 hours. Even if you don't have a 100% certain answer for what they're asking you. Let's say they need to know all the days that you're going to be available in the next week. You don't know that right now. That's okay. You need to get back to them and say, hey, thank you for reaching out to me. I need a little bit more time, please, to figure out what my schedule looks like. But you've gotten in touch with them. They know that you've gotten the message, and then they can move forward and figure out how to support you in that way. If you need those 24 hours to figure out with the help of us what to do next, that's fine. But please make sure that you're relaying that information back to the schools so that they're not left hanging. The worst thing you can do is have a potential opportunity on the table and it falls through because you didn't respond back in time. You might be one person they're talking to, but they could also be talking to 3, 4, 5 other people who are also a good fit for the school. And that could have been the perfect fit job for you that was lost because you didn't respond in time. So just something to keep in mind. So moving forward, some other best practices. When we talk about being professional, that can mean a lot of things, and depending on where you're coming from or what you're doing, that can be a very loaded type of question. When we're talking about being professional, it means making sure that you are doing your best to sell yourself in a way that's going to make the school want to follow up with you. That means showing up earlier on time. That means that you are answering questions in a way that show that you really want the job. That means, after you're done responding and, following up with the folks when they do reach out to you. So it's not always about being perfect. It's about making sure you're responsive and you're keeping in mind what goal you're working towards getting. The second thing you need to do is make sure you're doing your homework. Make sure you're coming into this with an idea of what the school has to offer, what type of school it is, and where you might fit in that school to help it be more successful. By doing that, you're showing that you are really interested in what the school has to offer, with what the students and families are sending their kids to do in the school, and how you can contribute to make that school even better than it already is. And then you're showing your competence. You're showing what you would do in certain situations or if asked a particular questions. Make sure that you are thinking about what you bring to the table, and we'll get into that more down the road, but think about what you bring to the table and how you can support and help the school in making sure that it's the best it can be. And then be humble. We know that folks come into situations working in schools sometimes with a lot of experience. Sometimes you've had experiences working in schools already. That said, Schools want people who are going to be reflective and responsive to the situations around them. It's great to have confidence. You want to make sure that you're coming in, though, with a little bit of humility and making sure that they know that you're willing and able to learn and listen to what's going on rather than tell people how you think things should go. It's important to have a voice, but it's also very important to be a listener and figure out where you fit in before you start telling people how things should go. So the next thing we're taking a look at is, the next thing we're taking a look at are high expectations. So when we're talking about schools and students, the worst thing that we can say is to, assume that certain students or certain groups of students are not able to succeed at the same level as everyone else. We know that there may be more supports and scaffolds that are needed to make sure that students reach as much success as possible. However, to just blatantly assume or group students in a way that says these students are going to be successful and these students are not because is something that's going to really quickly disqualify you from being the kind of person that schools want. You want to make sure you're setting goals for students that are ambitious, that are tied into their academics. You want to make sure that you're investing in students by making sure that you know what your expectations are and relay those expectations to students, family, and the staff that you work with. You want to make sure you're assuming responsibility, not just saying it's partially my responsibility or my fault if my students aren't doing right. You want to make sure you're owning that responsibility. In the classroom, you are the person that folks are going to come to if something doesn't go right. It's your responsibility to make sure that's important. And finally, you need to make sure that you're being effective and reflective about how things are going on in a situation. If something is not very clear, if something is not going the way that it should, make sure that you're clearly and effectively explaining what you think is happening and what you think should go on. And that reflection is an important piece as you go throughout not just the interview process, but the overall school experience as a whole. If teachers aren't reflective, if teachers aren't taking time to figure out what's going on in their classroom and in their school, then they are not making sure that their students are getting everything they need because they're making assumptions rather than making changes based on what they see happening. So we talked about what you can do when you're in that situation. But when you are looking at situations and you're thinking about homework, right? When you're thinking about the schools that you're going to go to, make sure that you're taking time to be prepared as you walk into the building. You don't want to be that person who comes in and says, I don't know anything about your school. I don't know anything about what's happening here. I didn't even know this was an elementary school. I thought it was a high school. I've heard all those before. And those are going to be things that really quickly tell people this person really isn't interested or didn't take the time to show that they were interested in what we have to offer here at this school. This is very serious. Students only get one opportunity to go through school. It's not as though if they go 1 through 12 and then you say, well, they didn't get it right the first time, let's go ahead and start all over again. If a school is here, it's here for a reason. And we hope that the people going into those schools are going to be as passionate and determined to make sure students have the best opportunities possible as they would for their family and their own children. So if you're coming into a space and don't have any idea of what's going on, that shows that you may not be the best fit for the school. So just make sure you're doing that. And afterwards, I recommend that you take a little bit of time to reflect and think about that. So before we move into the larger piece of how to sort of frame the interview questions, I did want to take a moment and see if anyone had any questions or thoughts as we're going along. If there at any point you do, and I'm in the middle of something, feel free, if you are on the video chat, to there's a chat option, chat a question in there, and I'll check it either as we're going along or as you're thinking about something, or at the very end, I'll try to address as many of those as possible. So anyone have any questions or thoughts at this time?
I do have just one. I had a question about the 15 minutes early, because I know I'm a hiring manager, and that seems a little bit like too much time, unless it's a matter of just like finding your way. But 15 minutes is a lot of time and can be disruptive if someone's expecting someone around a certain time. And I know in the interviews I've had and even the interviews that I've conducted, 5 minutes is generally like just right, because you're there, but you're not sitting there kind of staring at the admin team while they awkwardly wait kind of for their boss to come see you.
Yeah. So I'd say that, there is definitely getting somewhere too early. You know, I've definitely had people who've shown up for interviews an hour early, which, you know, definitely shows some promptness, but also shows a lack of time management. Like, what are you doing that required you to be in this space an hour earlier than we expected you? On the other hand, I definitely have had folks who show up late. So making sure that you have at least you're in the area within a certain amount of time is important, and then in front of them within a reasonable amount of time. 10 to 15 minutes is what I would consider reasonable. But if you're in the space, you're not driving to get there, you're not rushing, you're not figuring out where you're going, giving a little cushion on that sense. Maybe you're waiting outside for a few minutes, maybe you're waiting in your car, whatever it is that you might need to do, but give yourself enough time to get there without having to stress about whether or not you're going to be there either just on time or a little bit later are really key things to think about. Any other questions at the moment before we move on? Did that answer it? I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. Any other questions before we move forward? All right, again, if you do have any questions, anyone, please feel free to use the chat option, and I will check that as we go along, and especially at the very end. All right, so the next thing. So now we get into kind of the meat of what we're talking about here. And this is important to keep in mind because as we are talking about specific questions, as you're answering those specific questions, you need to be thinking about along the way, what are the different parts and pieces from your own experience and your potential experience as a teacher that you will be able to pull in to make this question response the best that it can be. So we're using the PAR strategy to do that. And PAR basically breaks down as what was the problem, what action did you take, and what was the result. And so, you know, as you are going through the questions and different components in this interview slideshow here, I'll be sharing it back out. Please think about what are the PAR components for each of those questions. So for example, tell me about a major obstacle you encountered and what you did to address that obstacle. That's a very common one. It's also phrased as things like, you know, describe a time when you had to overcome a challenge. Describe a situation where you had to work with others to resolve a situation or a problem. There are lots of different variations on that, but it's a very common one because in schools, they like to know about your ability to solve problems, and especially solve problems when there are many people or different competing things for your time or energy happening around you. So for using the problem, action, result framework, one thing you always want to keep in mind is you're setting the stage when it comes to the problem. You're providing some context and information that whoever you're responding to needs to know. So if you're talking about a situation that happened in your last job, describe a little bit about that job and what your role is in it. Don't take 20 minutes to do so. Take a few minutes to set the stage. When you're talking about the action, describe your role using action verbs and describe what you did, not what others did. It's okay to describe how you were supported or helped along the way, but it's most important to say how you specifically took action to make something happen. And then finally, when we're talking about the result, you want to make sure that you're able to measure or quantify your accomplishments as much as you can. Tie it back to the original question and make sure you're telling how you incorporated or added something into that situation to make it better for others. So let's say, for example, we're talking about a situation at a previous role. You had a situation where you were tasked with a very large project, even though you had 15 other things on your plate and you had some situations outside of work that you were trying to handle as well. So that's a pretty major obstacle somebody has. For whatever you do, you always want to make sure that you can find a positive result to the situation. If you're thinking of a situation that didn't have a positive result, then you probably need to rethink it and have that planned in advance. I wouldn't give a situation where, after all those things that happened, it was a failure, I lost my job, and I learned that I probably should do a better job next time. That is a lesson. However, that's not what they want to hear. They want to hear how you're able to come to a positive resolution to the situation. You want to make sure that you're keeping your responses short and you're highlighting what we call transferable skills. We'll get more into transferable skills in a little bit, but those are the things that you bring to the table from your past experiences that will also carry through into your experience as a teacher. What are those concrete or soft skills that you have that make you stand out or give you a leg up on folks that help you solve problems or come to a positive resolution in a situation? So that PAR structure there is a good way to think about that. So let's take a look at some other ways that that might play out. So as we're taking a look here, you're talking about, what are some of those ways that you're incorporating so the best practices and things from your past experience into this current situation. Those are those transferable skills and mindsets that you have. So consider your ability to work with others, your excitement about new challenges. Also think about those high expectations that we talked about with students that help you understand their learning and drive them to be the best students they can be within your class. What are your own responsibilities that you have? So these are all things that you need to figure out how to communicate along the way as you're describing that PAR strategy that you have there. As you're going through and taking a look at the ones on this slide here, afterwards also look through and see, are there any of these that I'm not sure how to communicate? Write those down so that you can, afterwards figure out what that means for you. And if you're not sure, when I send out the slide, there are some additional resources that kind of highlight what are some of those transferable skills that you bring to the table already. There are a couple checklists, there are a couple guides that we have to offer for you that help you figure out what those are. And then once you figure out what those priority main ones that you have are, you can also take a look at some of the ones that you may not have identified and whether or not you need to dig a little bit deeper and think through, hey, when have I done this? And if not, how can I explain why I haven't done this moving forward? So those are those transferable skills, those mindsets that you bring into the role that those school leaders, those hiring managers are looking to hear about. Any questions about those? All right. So how do you show that you're a constant learner? Don't be surprised if you're asked challenging questions during your interview. Principals want to know how you respond if something happens. One thing that I can say after being a teacher for 10 years and working in a variety of other contexts around schools is that even when you know exactly what you're supposed to be doing going into school every day, you have all your lessons planned, your copies made, your lab or your project ready to go for students, your classroom is set up before you leave at the end of the day before, everything's good to go. Stuff happens. And so as a result, you need to be able to address those situations as the adult in the room, as the teacher supporting and serving those students in your classroom to the best of your ability. And so principals want to know if something happens, if there's a change or a shift, there's an upset parent, there is a change in schedule due to inclement weather. We're in Western Massachusetts. How are you going to deal with those situations to still have that amount of success that they expect of you every day? If you don't have an immediate answer to a situation, that's okay. It's okay to say, I need a minute, or can I please have a moment to think about that? Oh, I think I have a good idea, but let me just make sure I'm phrasing this the right way. Give yourself time to pause. It's always okay to take a second to figure out what's going on. It's better to do that than it is to jump in and say, oh, what I would do is, and then have to backtrack because you didn't think through what you were about to say. Highlight those transferable skills. Make sure you're thinking about what you bring to the table that might help make you successful. And then think about what are those things out there that might help give you a little bit of support if in the moment you're struggling. So things like, in that situation, I would reach out to my fellow teachers. I would make sure that if I didn't understand the topic or piece of information that I was expected to deliver to students and families, I would research articles or books about it, and then also make sure I'm asking my administrators what's going on and how do I figure that out. If professional development or additional resources are available for me to learn from, I would take some time to do that. So those are some safe ones you can use to try to give yourself support if you just don't really have any idea. It's better to come up with something that makes sense and fits the topic than it is to say, I don't know. If you are answering multiple questions, sometimes even ones that they just really consider important with I don't know, you're setting yourself up to have a difficult chance of standing out from those people who are able to answer those questions, sometimes with less experience and with fewer transferable skills than you bring to the table. So here's an example question. How will you learn and employ the new Developing Interpersonal Communication Skills curriculum that we use here at our school? I have no clue what the Developing Interpersonal Communication Skills curriculum is. I know communication skills. I know developing, you're helping students learn them. So what I would say is, okay, this is a new curriculum. Do we have any resources that we have that will provide us with some information about how that should be carried out over the course of the class? If not, where can I look to find information? And are there any, and I would ask somebody on staff who has experience working with students on developing communication skills, what suggestions or advice they have. I still don't have any clue about what that curriculum is. However, based on using those skills and tricks that we have to kind of make sure that you're answering the question, even when you don't have a perfect answer, that gives a little bit of structure and support to make that happen. right, I see we have a question. If I'm asked a question in the phone interview and gave a reasonably good response, then afterwards remember the most appropriate useful reply. I would say if you've already answered the question and the time has passed, unless it comes up again, let it go. You gave a good answer. There's always a better answer, and hindsight is 20/20. So it's better to make sure that you're just doing your best in the moment. You're making the most of the time that you have with those folks, and then you're moving forward. If you're always going back to dwell on it, that's good reflection, and it's definitely a good idea to think about what's going on. But moving back on that, it doesn't really help your case to say you were confident in the moment, you said what you needed to say, unless there's something that, you know, was dramatically misconstrued and they brought it up, like I said, in a second or follow-up meeting. All right, another question. All right, so any other questions on that before we move on? All right. So when we're taking a look at situations, principals like to figure out what you're going to do when you are the person in control of your classroom. There are always situations where, you know, everyone has a bad day, students have a bad day, staff have a bad day. However, classroom management is something that schools want to see that you have some sort of grasp or understanding about, that even if you've never run a classroom, you're going to be able to be the person that students recognize and respond to as the person that is leading the classroom, and that they have some sort of expectations around what their behavior and conduct within the classroom space should be. So classroom management includes not just, you know, the idea of managing, but it's the overall culture that you plan and set within a classroom. You're managing those expectations. If you're managing the expectations that you set for the class, you're not managing students on a day-to-day basis. If those are very clear, if you have structures in place, if students know what those structures are, if your administrators know what those structures are, if your families know what those structures are, then at the end of the day, you're making sure that those structures are in place and operating smoothly, rather than trying to figure out what each and individual student is doing in every second of the day. That's not to say that's never going to be the case, but overall, you want to be spending more time running your class and delivering the lesson than you want to managing the behavior of individual people along the way. So that happens through making sure that you have relationships with your students. That happens with making sure that you have those clear structures that I talked about with very high, clear expectations. That happens when you either are following the system of consequences and rewards that exist within the school, or if there isn't a clear and concise one within the building, you're creating one within your classroom that works for your structure and your personality style. You are making sure that you're carrying those things out with consistency every single time. One of the best lessons that I got around what classroom management is, even once I knew how to do it myself, how do I explain it to others? It's making sure that whenever you are interfacing with a student or family member around a consequence or an infraction around the school, is that you're fair, you're firm, and you're consistent. You're fair because you are seeing your classroom as a group of people who are individuals. However, nobody in the classroom is better or worse than the other. So if there is a consequence or there is a reward that's handed out, that consequence and reward is handed out fairly to the entire group, and that happens every single time. You're firm because you want your students to understand that there is a line drawn. There are certain things that are not okay in our class because we are here to learn. We want to make sure that things are happening smoothly. And then you're consistent. You're not doing that once in a while. You're not doing it if you are in the mood for it. You're not doing it because it's a good day and everyone's on point. You're doing it every time, all the time, because that's how you create that structure where you're managing, making sure the structure's in place and not managing individual students along the way. If you've worked with children before, think about how you've worked with them, what worked, what didn't, how are you going to take those lessons into the future? All these things wrap around into a way to explain what classroom management means to you. And if you're not sure about that, and you're worried about coming into an interview, how do I explain that when I don't even know what that looks like? There are plenty of videos on YouTube and other places around strong classroom management, developing classroom management, things like that, that you can get a sense for what are things that other schools use, what are some things that other teachers have used in the past that I might be able to learn from or adapt into my own classroom. It's better to come prepared and have some knowledge about what things mean than to try to wing it. If push comes to shove, it's better to have an answer and figure out, in using context clues or whatever you can, but the best strategy is to make sure that you come into the situation as prepared as possible. So we're going to transition. We've talked about kind of the setting the stage where we are. We've talked about how to focus on individual parts and pieces of a response. Now let's go ahead and move towards taking a look at some of the sample questions. We're not going to go through, and be able to address or answer all of them. So that's where that chat box comes into. That's when, after the fact, you're taking some time to look at them and asking questions, if you have them, comes into play. But we will try to address some of the most important ones, the most frequently asked ones, and get some feedback from you as well as we go along the way here. So when a question comes up, one thing you want to do before you craft a response is figuring out, what is that core ask? What are they asking you specifically? Make sure you really hone in on that. And if you're not 100% sure, ask some clarifying questions. There's nothing wrong with getting a little more information if you can from whoever's asking you that question. You want to make sure you're going to give an answer that matches. I've been in situations where I've been the person receiving interviews from folks, and ones where I've been saying in an interview where I think I know what they're going for, but it's not exactly what was asked. So I've given responses that didn't quite match because I was trying to answer the question I thought they were asking. And I've seen people do the same to me. So you want to make sure everyone's on the same page there, because otherwise it leads to confusion. If there's limited amounts of time for you, that means that you have to go back and fix what happened, and you might miss out on giving that great answer that you had 3 questions down the road there. Make sure you're answering the whole question. If there are different components or pieces, make sure that you hit each one and that you're very direct about what each piece is. Assume the best. Make sure that if you're focusing on students and parents, you are assuming that this is a situation that may be a one-off. It may be a situation where people are passionate or concerned about something, and so emotions may be rising, but you don't want to use language that would show that the student or family member is less than in any way, or is acting in a way that is a poor reflection on their character. Things happen within schools, things happen within situations, and so again, we want to always assume the best. And then along those lines, check your biases. That's something that is a catchphrase around education, but what that means is that if you are dealing with a situation, make sure you're taking stock of the whole situation and what could be causing someone to act or react in a certain way. Make sure you're not making assumptions about students based on their identity or the communities that they come from, or any preconceived notions that may have come up over the course of your life or experience. You want to make sure that you are answering the question based on the situation at hand and incorporating things that might be important if that is some context that's needed, but being very careful that you're not putting an extra layer of your own impressions or assumptions on folks based on what you interpret the situation to be. That can be difficult, and so as you look through some of these questions here, if there's a part where you need to figure out and step back and say, what does this mean for me? Please go ahead and take a little bit of time to do so. So let's go ahead and do a little bit of practice. So there will be some time for you to take a look at some questions, to work through what some of them mean on your end, and then we will discuss and take a look at what are some of the structures or concerns that you have. So go ahead and take 30 seconds to look through this frequently asked questions list. There are a lot of questions on here, but as you're taking a look at them, look for any that you wouldn't be immediately able to answer right now, and then we'll touch base on a few of those in a few minutes. So take about 30 seconds to look now. All right, so I hope you've taken a look. I know you might not have been able to see all of them just yet, but I will say that if there is a question that stands out as one that if you were asked in the moment right now, you would struggle to answer, please feel free to put that question or at least parts of it into the chat now, just so I can get a sense of where folks are. I know that there are going to be some people who see this after the fact. I would encourage you to make sure that you write down what some of those questions are that stand out as ones that would be struggles for you down the road. But for those who are with us now, just one is fine. So take about 30 seconds to do that, please. Any question that you would struggle to answer fully and effectively at this point in time. All right. Tell me about yourself. That is definitely one that can be a struggle. Anybody else? Do you believe you'll be able to implement the systems and curriculum? Exactly. It's hard to know that if you don't know a lot about the school. So we'll talk about some things that might help with that. All right, so we'll take about 10 more seconds. All right. Where do you see yourself in the next 3 to 5 years? I would have trouble answering that one myself, so I can understand that one. Student confidence or mastery. Yep, I got it. How will you promote family involvement? All right, so these are some great questions that have been asked here in terms of what that looks like. So we're going to take a look at some that I consider the top 3. Some of these are going to be addressed in there, and there are going to be some others that I'll be able to loop back as we wrap up towards the end of our conversation tonight. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide. On the next slide here, we have 3 questions that I feel are ones that come up on a regular basis, ones that I've seen people struggle with mightily sometimes, and you know, if they don't struggle, the responses are ones that have given me pause or have given principals pause when they've tried to answer. So the first one I listed here is, why do you want to work at our school or district specifically? What would you consider to be your greatest personal weakness? And then how will you promote family involvement in your students' educational activities? So let's go ahead and take a look at the first one here. And I'm going to give some sample responses based on things that I know folks have said. Sometimes I'll give a negative response and then follow up with a positive. For a couple, I'll just give some tips that might be good to think about. One of the worst things you can say when you're talking about why do you want to work at our school is to say, because I need a job. That is something that is true. I'm not going to say that we don't work, not just because something is a passion or cause to us, but because we need opportunities, we need insurance, things like that. However, if the first thing that you're telling somebody about why our school or why you want to work here is because you need a job, that shows that you haven't really considered the gravity of the work that you're going to be doing within a school. It's one thing if you're going to be doing work that isn't people-facing, that you're going to be sitting behind a computer and coding all day, you're not interacting with somebody, and whether or not you code perfectly is not going to determine the trajectory of someone's life 10, 20, 30 years down the road. As a teacher, there is a lot of weight placed upon a person that's applying for that role, and an administrator or a hiring manager wants to know why you are in our school specifically. You could be applying to a school in Northampton, you could be applying to a school in Boston, you could be applying to a school in the South. Why are you applying to our school when you might have other opportunities here or elsewhere? So one thing to really keep in mind when you're answering that question is really thinking about, what about this particular school or what about this particular area that calls to you? For some, it might be a tire connection. Maybe you were a student in a school in the area, in the community in the past, and you want to return there to be a teacher there. It may be that you had an experience in a school that wasn't 100% positive and you want to make up for that in some way. Maybe there are some things about the school or community that call back to things that you enjoy or aspire. It's not so much that you want to work with these kids, because they're not going to be these kids. When you're working with students, they should be your kids, not your own personal ones that you're raising throughout the rest of their lives, but they are your students, they're your responsibility. So if you're working to go somewhere because these kids are different than what you've experienced in the past, that's not an answer that somebody wants to hear. You need to really be honest about what about the school or about the community calls to you, how you feel that you can contribute, or what about this will be an experience that you feel will uplift not just you, but the community that you serve. For the question number 2 here, you have, what would you consider to be your greatest personal weakness? I've talked with people before who've said, I don't have any weaknesses, and I would love to be that person. But realistically, that's not the case. If you're going into a situation and you can't figure out anything that you could do better, then you're going to be a teacher that never responds to feedback in a way that's going to be beneficial for you or for the students you serve. However, when you're talking about those weaknesses, your response should inspire confidence that whatever that weakness is, it's not going to permanently be a weakness, or it's an area of growth that you are working to overcome or that you have overcome through either practice, experience, or a combination of the two. If it's something that's still a struggle and you don't have any clear way of getting through it, if you say, I'm really bad at organization and I just don't know where to start, that is a bad sign, because it's not something where you can say, oh, well, I feel that I'm really strong about delivering instruction. However, I know that I need to be mindful of watching time to make sure I'm not going over. That is a way that you can talk about your organization in a way where you're working towards it, or that you know that there's going to be a solution down the road. If you just have a big, broad situation that's not getting any better, your organization is poor. You don't show up to places on time. You don't know how to communicate with other adults in a positive manner. Those are some big red flags that folks are going to say, hey, what's going on here? Is this the kind of person that we want to make sure is in front of our students? So really be mindful about what the challenge that you're facing is, what you're doing or have done to improve or solve that problem, and then the initiative or the skills that you built along the way to make sure that that's not going to be a problem moving forward. And then for the last one here, how you promote family involvement in your students' educational activities. This is a tough one, and many people have expressed, I don't know my students. How am I going to make sure that I am meeting their families or speaking with their families? For others, it may be, I come from a different background, or I speak a different language than the families of my students. So what do I do in those situations? Well, at the very core heart of everything that you're doing, the most important thing you can do to make sure that your families feel as though they have a role and an involvement in their students' academic success is to know who their students are. If you know your students, then by time and exposure and talking to them, you're going to know something about their families. If a student feels safe and trusts you and understands kind of you're there to support and help them, then you are going to make sure that they are receiving the support they need, and families are going to understand that. And that transfers across whether or not somebody is speaking the same language as you, somebody comes from the same background as you, or somebody is unfamiliar with what's going on in terms of the content in your classroom. You want to make sure that your students are feeling safe and trust you as an educator, that they believe and know that you care about who they are and their future, and that you know as much about them as is appropriate as a teacher. So having that bit of information, having that knowledge about them is the first step. The second step is making sure that you are trying multiple avenues for reaching their families. So if you are only sending emails, well, not every family might check their email. If you're only calling at certain times of day, not every family is able to talk at every time of day. If you are only talking to parents when something bad happens, well, then after a while, they're going to not really want to pick up the phone from you because they know, oh, they're only calling for something bad. So it's making sure that you are both communicating the good things that are happening in your class, and also when there are challenges, that you're doing so promptly, and again, using that fair, firm, and consistent manner to make sure explaining what's going on. It's not easy. There may be other people in the building who do a great job that you model off of, but really think about what you need to put in to make sure that you're getting out those responses from families that you'd like. So I see we have a response here. I struggle with the boundary or area between developing trust and being open and setting clear and firm expectations. So that is very understandable. What I would say is that, at the base level, your students are your students and you are their instructor. You're not their friend, you're not their pal, you're not their buddy. But you do care about them. And by being there, by being consistently there, by listening to them, by supporting them when they have issues, they will understand that you are there and that you do care about their future and are invested in them. That is something that you're working towards, is that they understand that you're invested in their success. It doesn't happen immediately, especially if you're new to a school or new to teaching, but it is something that grows over time and you have to keep at it. If you are, working to make sure that your students like you more than you are that your students understand that you're in their corner and you want to make sure that they have the best education possible, then you're going in two different directions that may meet eventually. But your focus should be on making sure that your students are learning the best they can and that they know that you're in their corner. And along the way, if you're doing that and your students are responsive to what you're doing and see you as somebody who's there to help them, then they will like you, they will understand you, and they will appreciate you. So just keep that in mind. Many of the questions seem geared toward people with teaching experience. That is true. However, even if you don't have teaching experience, some of those transferable skills do apply. When have you worked to explain things to others in the past? When have you had to overcome a situation working with coworkers or working with classmates in the past? When have you had to solve a problem that didn't have an easy solution? What did you do in those situations, and how will you translate that into a situation within the school building? Not everything is going to be a perfect one-to-one relationship there, but there are lots of situations where you can bring in what you know and add to that with some information about what you know about the school. All right. So here's an opportunity for us to take back and think about what's going on here. All right. So based on these situations, are there any new learnings or things that were a surprise? Feel free. I'm going to give folks a second to share out. The second question is, were there any important considerations that you're going to need to make as you start answering these questions that you really need to think about? So I'll give folks a chance to answer that one as well. And then, are there any questions that you still have? And so I'll give folks to answer that one. So let's go ahead and start with the first one. Are there any new things that you learned that you wanted to share out with the group? We'll take about 30 seconds if anyone has anything they want to say. And if you feel more comfortable chatting in the box, that's perfectly fine as well. All right. Second question. What are some important considerations that you're going to need to make when determining what to include in your responses? What are some things from your past, or what are some things that you're going to need to think about to make sure you're doing this as best you can? Anyone have any thoughts on that one, either in the chat box or verbally? All right, and then the last question. What questions do you still have after going through all this? And again, feel free to respond in the chat box or verbally. Either one is fine. All right, so moving forward. So we're not going to dive too deep into this one here, but I do want to highlight that there are going to be some other questions that I feel and that others have felt are important to really consider. All the questions on that sheet are fair game. There are some that aren't on there that could be thrown your way that are school specific or community specific, but there are some other questions that I think are important to think about as you are preparing for meeting with folks in school interview settings. So the first one is, how will you evaluate your success at the end of the year? The second one is, describe a difficult work experience and what did you do to solve it? How did you come to a resolution? Third one is, what is your approach to classroom management? We talked about that one a little bit. And then, what are your plans for the future? So those are some of the highlights of folks' questions when they share it out in the chat box. I will address one short thing for each one. I don't want to dwell too much time on them, but I do want to make sure that I hit the thing that works for me in terms of making sure that you walk away from this. So for the first question, how you evaluate your success? If you take away nothing from this question right here other than this, please take away that your answer to the question should begin with the student. What will the student learn or be able to do as a result of being in your presence and learning from you over the course of the year? There are lots of other things that could be great. They like you, they appreciate you, they give you high survey results, etc. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is, what should your students have learned or be able to do at the end of the year that they couldn't do beforehand? For the second one, describe a difficult work experience. Making sure that you are not throwing people under the bus or burning bridges in terms of talking badly about folks. You want to make sure that if there was a negative situation, that you accentuate or highlight the positives that you were either able to have as an end result or that you were able to do using your leadership skills. For your classroom management approach, again, make sure that you are highlighting on those clear expectations and structures. And then for the last one, your plans for the future, you need to make sure that you're being passionate about what fits for you and what you might want to do. It doesn't have to be a perfect, this year I'm going to do this, next year I'm going to do this, 2 years out from now I'm going to do this. You want to make sure, though, that you can at least give sort of a ballpark at this school, I hope to, increase my skills and at the end of the year, be seen as a successful first-year teacher. I hope to, pursue some extracurricular leadership opportunities and eventually, move up and, take on more responsibilities or be more successful. If you don't see yourself staying in the classroom for 10 years, don't say I'm going to be in the classroom for 10 years. If you see yourself possibly working in schools in some other capacity, I want to start out teaching, but, down the road, I'd like to be a guidance counselor or something like that. Be honest. But make sure that the questions that or the response that you're giving is one that's going to encourage them to see you as somebody who's a part of their community and not one that says, oh, in 3 years, you're going to be a lawyer. Well, then how does that fit in with you joining the school? So be very mindful of how you answer, but also be as honest as possible within those boundaries. So we talked about questions that you're going to be asked. One important thing to do is it's not just an interview for them to figure out whether you're a good fit for the school. It's also an interview for you to figure out whether the school is a good fit for you. If you go in and say, I've never seen the school, I've never talked to somebody, but I know this is the perfect place for me, then you have a really strong opinion of something that you may not know as much as you need to about. So very carefully, make sure that you are thinking through what else do I need to know about this school setting or this school environment or the school culture to make sure that I'm getting into something that works for me. Even if a school is, a great school, it may not be a great school for everybody. If I was a middle school teacher for 10 years, I know personally, if there were the school that was offering, 6 figures, it was offering, a gym membership, it offered, free snacks in the teacher's lounge, but I had to teach pre-K2 all the time, I wouldn't do it because that's not what I want. That's not the situation that I want out of a school setting. So be very clear and upfront about what are some questions that you would like to know. Make sure that when you are either going on a phone interview or going in an in-person interview, you have a couple ready to go, some stock ones that you're good with, but the things that you're going to think about that are kind of overarching things to keep in mind: the curriculum, the programs of study or the content within the school, and then the school's mission or vision for their students and families. Those are ones that are always safe bets to address, but there's some others that might be helpful to think about, and we'll touch base on those in a few minutes. So take about 2 minutes or so, and I'd love it if you can think or craft through a question that you would ask a school that would benefit you or help you learn more about a school in a way that would make you feel better about it. So take a minute or two to go ahead, think through for a minute, and then in the chat box, go ahead and draft some of those. And I want to see kind of what folks are thinking at this point in time. I can also give some support if it's a little bit off. For those who are watching this recorded, please, take a little bit of time to write that down. And then if you want to follow up with one of us, we're happy to follow up with you in the future. One question: what are some of the largest struggles that you see this school grappling with? So that's a good question. What I would say is, phrase it the same way that you would kind of them asking you a weakness question. What would you say are some of the areas of growth for the school in the coming school year? So you want to make sure that if there are no struggles, they say, oh, we're good to go. I think we're ready to go. And if there are struggles, it's not saying they have to figure out a way to explain why their school may not be perfect. If they are giving answers that give you some pause or give you some worry, you have some ability to work with that, but you also want to make sure that you're not using any preconceived notions or assumptions that people may have about a school that are unfounded. Anybody else with any questions that you might ask during an interview? Give folks another 30 seconds. Excellent. So asking about diversity, inclusion, and equity. So exactly, what are some of the ways that you make sure that student and staff identity is being recognized and upheld? That's a great question. What are some resources that the school uses to implement that within their classrooms? That's a good resource. What professional developments are available around that? That's another good question around that. How would you describe the school culture? That's pretty broad. So what I would say is, can you describe a little bit more about your the structure of your school? What are some of the things that you feel the school does really well, and what are some of the things that you feel the school has some room to improve upon? Or if you're talking specifically about like behavior things within the school, how would you describe the school's behavior management or classroom management structure? What are some things I should know as a new teacher coming into the school? And then one more here, as an ESL candidate, what role does an ESL teacher play in your school? Excellent. So you're honing in on the specific role that you're looking to play in the school, and what does that mean for you working with the rest of the staff? That also would apply to a special education teacher or a middle school math teacher even. You know, what is the role of a math teacher within this building? What are expectations for math teachers within this building? That would be a way to phrase it like that. And then the last one I'm going to answer for right now, how do your staff keep work-life balance in order to better serve students? I wouldn't say don't answer that one, because I do think that self-care and mindfulness are very important. However, what I would say are, that wouldn't be the question I would lead with. If they're asking you to have multiple questions, that might be a second or third question, but I wouldn't lead with that one. The only reason I say that is because as much as self-care and being mindful about your own limits are important, and some strong principles will immediately say, this is what we value and this is what we believe. If you're leading with that, that can lead them to wonder, okay, this person is already putting limitations on what they're going to be able to do within the building, whether that's true or not. And so that could be a preconceived notion they put on you, whether that's fair or not. So again, I think it's an important question, but I don't know if I would be asking that as the first lead-off question if they ask you, do you have any questions? So, and I can follow up with you if you want some more advice on that. All right, so moving on, so we stay on track here. Here's some additional questions that might help, and I'll leave this up for about 30 seconds. Again, I'll share this back out with folks, but these are some that might also fit in if you're having trouble coming up with one, or if you're wondering what to do if they keep on asking you any more questions. It's okay to just have one question. That means that you're thinking about it. If you have 2 or 3, that's great. Also know that they may not have time to answer all of them, but having something in your back pocket is better than not having anything. All right. So in terms of next steps, prepare for your interview. We're here at the home stretch. We're wrapping things up. We're making sure that, we are leaving this webinar. We're leaving this conversation where you have somebody that you can talk to directly, and you're doing this on your own. As you prepare for your interview, just know that the Teacher Mass team is here to support you. So if you're doing your homework, if you're looking up the school, if you're learning as much as you can on your own, there may be a point where you need some additional support. First thing to do, I would say, is go back and take a look at this slide that I'm going to send out after we're done with the call here. The second thing I would do is, write some things down. Get it on paper, type it out, whatever works best for you. But it's easier to look at it and tweak it than it is to kind of think about it off the top of your head. And then if something still needs some tweaking, if you're still not sure, we're here to support. So reach out. I'm happy. Afterwards, again, I'll share out my email address. There are other folks on the team, Aisha and Lisa, who are also happy to help you if there's some structures or concerns that you have. But we're a resource. Make sure you use all the ones that are available to you. Make sure that you are practicing, all right? Oh, sorry, I missed the resume part. So your resume. Make sure that you are tweaking and updating your resume. And there are some folks who have had an update from Lisa around your resume. Not everyone has. So if you haven't, that's okay. But if you have gotten an update from Lisa around your resume, please make sure you make whatever updates or tweaks need to be made, and then update Aisha about the fact that that update has been uploaded. If you have any questions or concerns, again, please let us know and we can talk about that offline. The next thing, practice. So, as you're going through, this is going to be stressful. So when we say relax, the best way to relax and be prepared is to have tried a few of these things out. So find somebody that you trust who's going to give you some, constructive feedback. Not somebody who's going to yell at you if you can avoid it, but somebody who's going to give you some constructive feedback about your performance. Ask some questions. Practice responding to some questions. Practice, what you would do if thrown a curveball. So have them generate some questions that aren't on this list here. But the more you can do to give yourself some experiences that are at least similar to what you might experience in an interview setting, the better you're going to be when the time comes to actually do that. And then, make sure that you are thinking through what might happen along the way. If you are, going to go in as a special education teacher, what are some things about special education that they might ask? If you're not sure, that might be a good Google search or a question for us. Hey, is there anything else that's content specific that I need to know? But some things that always come up: management, Planning. How do you plan? What are some thoughts about planning? If you're not sure, what do I need to know about planning? Literacy, making sure that students are either able to read or using their reading skills to the best of their ability. I was a teacher for 10 years. I taught English for the first 2 of them. I was never a great literacy teacher teaching students to read, and that was something that I knew I needed to make sure I did work on my own to get better at. That's something that you might want to look at. What are some basic, facets or parts of literacy instruction, and that might be helpful going in. Differentiation. For special education especially, but for ESL and math as well, how do you support students with different academic needs? Some students have the ability to jump in and get everything done without any help. Others are going to need some scaffolding or support to make sure that they know what's going on in a lesson. And then also, if you're focusing on students who do have those additional needs, if they are, we're also working on translation concerns or cognating things in their head, then that might need some additional support in there. So what might that look like? So overall, be prepared, take a deep breath. If you need some time, take some time, get there a little bit early so you have some breathing room, and then make sure that, after everything is done, you wrap up with some questions of your own and ask about some next steps. We're really excited that everyone is in this spot. We know that, some folks are further along in the interview process than others, but all of you will get there. That's what happened last year, and I expect that to happen again this year. So we do really want to push you to make sure that you're reaching out for us for support, but we are here to help. So that's it for me. That's all the things I have. And I know we have about 3 minutes or so, and we can go a little bit over if we need to. But if anyone has any questions that remain, please feel free either in the chat box or verbally to let me know, and I'm happy to answer them for the next 5 minutes or so. I took a little bit extra time at the end here. So. One question in the chat box. Yes, it was recorded. So after the fact, it'll take usually about 5 hours or so to upload into the cloud and be ready to go. But sometime either later tonight or first thing in the morning, I will email it back out with the slides and everything that we did today. Any other questions? Either about specific questions or just in general, the interview process, the application hiring process? I don't want to force anyone. I will say it's easier to, get it while everyone's in the room now than doing some one-off stuff because it may help other people as well. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to fill in the chat. If not, when you're ready to log off, you're more than welcome to. I appreciate your time tonight. And thanks, everyone. If you want to hang out for a little bit and ask questions, you're perfectly able to as well. All right, take care, everyone.
Hi, Michael. I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
So what is the normal hiring process looks like? So for instance, you are invited for the interview with the principal. So, but they didn't say that you need to prepare a demo. So basically, for the first round interview, you're just coming in and just answer questions. How does it look like for the first round interview?
It depends on the school and it depends on the situation. So there are some where you go through application questions, and then after the application questions are reviewed, they do a phone interview. After the phone interview, they do an in-person interview. After that, they might do a demo lesson. Others, they kind of skip and jump around. I will say that, there are some standard things that happen. At some point, for the most part, you will have at least an in-person interview, and either at the same time or a different time, you will have some sort of demo or presentation lesson in front of somebody, either students or administrators. And those are pretty typical throughout most of the hiring processes. I'm not saying they happen every time, but I would say 90% of the time, unless there's some extenuating circumstance, like it's the summer and no students are around, or something else is going on, somebody's far away and they can't be in person for a demo lesson or an in-person interview. Those are pretty standard. But those are things that are going to happen most of the time. Aside from that, though, you might have a phone interview before you meet with somebody. Afterwards, you might have another follow-up meeting at the school to see the school or visit the school to see how you interact with folks. But along the way, do expect at least an in-person and a demo lesson. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I will say I was surprised by the demo request because I had gone to 2 other interviews and then they made me offers. And then for this third one, I have to do a demo, which I thought was really exciting and interesting, but wondered why maybe it didn't come up for everybody. Although we're not trained teachers, so that it's definitely a different kind of challenge for us.
Definitely. And so I will say that, schools should be taking into consideration that they know that you either have not taught before, or your teaching experience, such as it is not that perhaps of a traditional classroom teacher. So that is something that they are keeping in mind. And, you know, for other programs that are similar in terms of alternative certification, they also know that they may not be able to do a demo lesson. So usually there, like I said, there is some sort of in-person or people-facing component. If you do have a demo lesson, the school is just doing another layer to make sure that you're fitting in with what they have to offer. If they don't do a demo lesson, it's not a knock against the school. Like I said, depending on the situation, the circumstance, they do adjust based on where folks are or where they are in the hiring process. They may not be able to do a demo lesson right now because of their instruction needs or things like that as well. So, anybody else? Last question or two?
Actually, one more question. Since we actually, some of us will have to do demos, do you guys have any like resources for where we can start to look at lesson plans? And like, because when the principal or the vice principal I talked to today, he said, he alluded that other people who were already teaching would know exactly where to look, and so they were speaking the same language. So since we don't have that, do you have that to share with us so that we're not caught off guard when we have a week's time to prepare a lesson when it's the first in our life?
So in the resources shared by Aisha and Lisa in the welcome webinar, and I think in some of the emails following up, there are some interview and demo lesson resources there as well. So what I recommend doing is taking a look at those resources. I'm not sure if it's a full video. It might just be a set of slides. But along with that, if you know the general content area that they want you to work on, I would definitely look on YouTube for lessons about that content area. That's not to say copy it exactly, but it might give you either some ideas or some structures that you can put in place given the time constraints that you have. If you know you only have a 15-minute lesson, look for lessons at around 15 minutes. If you know you have a full class period of 50 minutes, look for lessons at around 50 minutes. I know not everyone has time to look at the whole thing, but that will at least give you an idea of what goes on over the course of a lesson, teaching that content or teaching that particular subject matter, and it'll give you some advice. That's the best way, aside from actually being in a school and seeing it, to get a sense for what it looks like. Definitely depends on the type of school, definitely depends on the other structures within the school, exactly how that's going to look. But if you don't have a really good frame of reference at all, that's better than nothing, and it'll give you a start. So if after you've looked at the demo resources, if after you've looked at the video, you're still like, I don't have any clue, let us know, and we can kind of work with you from there. All right. Well, on that note, if there are no final questions, I'm going to go ahead and call it a night for everybody. Thank you for taking your time to speak with me today. Thank you for taking your time to kind of review the material. And now I hope you'll take some time to look through the rest of the information on here. It's a lot, I know, but look through here and start planning your own questions out and your own responses out. That's going to be a big help moving forward. So good luck with everything. I'm here as a resource, but have a good night in the meantime. All right, take care.
Thank you, Michael.
All right, bye-bye.